AIS participating countries. In light of COVID-19 pandemic, it is important for archipelagic and island states to have a resilient economy. Therefore, AIS Forum Secretariat introduces programs which focuses on blue economy. As a form of its commitment, AIS Forum developed Blue Economy Development Index, or BEDI. This index will be used as a tracking tool to determine the current use of coastal and marine resources, and it can be used as a tool to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Blue Financing Framework, or BFF, which provides a guidance for governments, financial institutions, philanthropists, and donors to align their investments with the blue economy principles and allow them to select a project to be financed in the blue economy sectors. Smart and innovative solution programs, such as sharing knowledge sessions with experts and representatives from AIS participating countries. Plankton, which was a competition to raise awareness in reducing marine plastic debris. Impact pitching, which connects startups, small and medium-sized enterprises, potential investors, and growth enablers to gain partnership. And Ending Plastic Pollution Innovation Challenge, which was a collaboration with Marine Plastic Debris Project from UNDP Indonesia to address marine plastic pollution in Southeast Asia. Many solutions to challenges that affect AIS participating countries in 4 main thematic areas and SDG 14 goals are produced through collaboration programs. These programs will explore opportunities through innovation and experiment that benefits on a local, regional, and international scale through sharing knowledge and experiences between AIS participating countries. The archipelagic and island
Nisambula Vinaka, and welcome friends and colleagues joining from the Pacific, Fiji, and around the world. My name is Gabriel Mara, and I will be your moderator for tonight's webinar. Tonight's webinar and talk will be around SDG 14 on protecting and restoring the ocean by utilizing hidden ecosystem services. So happy World Oceans Day. The ocean is an ecosystem. And much like that, our conversation will be around the goods and services or the ecosystem services it provides. Ecosystem services are goods and services that benefit all aspects of human life. This can range from stronger economies, the diverse food products we consume, and even advancements in medical research, which are a direct result or an indirect result from wildlife and natural ecosystems. With all protocols observed, welcome. And without further ado, I will welcome our first panelist. Our first panelist is Ms. Sabrina Pania. Ms. Sabrina Pania is a researcher and scientist from the University of the South Pacific. She will, her presentation today will cover on her work on sea cucumbers at the university. Thank you. Ms. Sabrina.
Okay, hello everyone and happy World Ocean Day. My name is our moderator, Mr. Mara has said. I'm Sabrina Pania and today I'll be presenting on my work at the USB at the University of the South Pacific. And I have a degree, I have a bachelor's degree in marine science and also a postgraduate diploma that enabled me to apply for further studies in research. So now I'm doing my master's at USB. And I want to acknowledge and thank the AIS Forum to host this platform where we can discuss and share knowledge on how we can protect and restore our ocean. So coming from our team, for our goals, as the moderator has already said, our goal is from the SDG 14, life below water, and the theme we'll be talking on today is to protect and restore the ocean by utilizing hidden ecosystem services. Now for the services that we have listed, Some of the ecosystem, the ocean has a diverse ecosystems, and they provide us with services in means of food, transportation, recreation, employment, and so forth. And one of the thing is that this can lead to depletion of resources being catered for us if our activities are not monitored and managed. So if we want to have a stable ocean and a healthy ocean, it can back to us on how we manage or utilize the resources that the ecosystems in the ocean provide for us. So for today, I'll be sharing on my field of research. I'll be talking on the sea cucumbers. Since I'm in Fiji, my research is based here as well. So since the sea cucumbers, this is a broad topic, and my main focus will be mostly on the post-harvest processing of sea cucumbers, and which this is in the batch demand trade. So this is important as sea cucumber is one of the it has a high economic value as one of the marine resources, and it's been exploited a lot of times, and now it has depleted stock. So there's some management that the fisheries or the people in authorities have placed in which they can control the harvesting from in which the people can harvest in a sustainable manner that can ensure that there's still some left for future generations. So my discussions will be on the importance of sea cucumber in the sea and the regulations on harvesting placed by the authorities, and the post-harvest, the importance of using the correct method of post-harvesting processes for sea cucumbers. So for my discussion, the importance of sea cucumbers, the significance it presents to the people is that, firstly, to the marine ecosystem is that it plays an important role by circulating of nutrients. Since the sea cucumbers are bottom feeders, they take in all the organic load at the benthic zones, and they recycle the nutrients, which shows up productivity for marine organisms that dwells in the benthic level of the ocean. And another one is that this highly priced commodity in the market, like sea cucumbers, once you process it and it reaches the end state, which is West Timor, it has a high value. It's a high value product when it is commercially exported, mostly to the Asian markets. And this is a process that starts from local processor by inner communities that went through all the middle peasants, the buyers, and finally the consumers that will sell it for further use, or they can other use further uses such as for medical purposes or food. And for the current status of sea cucumber harvesting here in Fiji is that it is closed as the Pacific Island countries due to depleted stocks. And the thing is that sea cucumbers, they take time to grow. They take time to grow to reach the maturity state in which they can be reproduced, or they reach the size to be harvested. So by placing a ban on harvesting, this enables the sea cucumber to grow, to reproduce, and also to reach a good size in which the locals can harvest and sell it for a profitable price. And the regulation placed into measure to measure the how we harvest the sea cucumber is that, apart from the ban placed by the Ministry of Fisheries here in Fiji, there is the legal size limit as well, and that you are only allowed to harvest a sea cucumber which is 7.6 centimeter and above, that is in length. And they also ban the use of underwater breeding apparatuses, and also they call for more transparency in grading prices, because sea cucumbers are priced and sold off according to their grades. And also there's a limit to the number of exporters, and to and to upgrade the processes, and also to the other one is also to limit the license and permits to practice buying and selling of sea cucumbers. And these are some of the actions that have been brought forward and implemented to manage the sea cucumbers. And apart from the Ministry of Fisheries, there's academic institutions like UST and Fiji's National University that take part in researches in various fields regarding the sea cucumber as well, to provide data in improving management actions, or to be part of this to prove aquaculture, to find ways in which we can manage certain species to be farmed as well. And then we have one of the most organizations here in Fiji that work closely with the government is the Wildlife Conservation Society. Wildlife Conservation Society that work closely with fisheries, and they have come up with ways or plan to implement a sea cucumber management. That is to address the overexploited marine resources so that it has time to restock, so that people can continue to harvest in the future when the harvesting season is open again. Other organizations that involve in the management of the sea cucumbers are SPC, WWF, and so forth. And these are all researchers that provided data that will help investors or governments or parties to place in laws in which this marine resource, the sea cucumber, can be managed well. And my third point is that for the importance of qualitative post-harvest processes. Now, batch steamers are graded and priced according to the quality presented during trading. And these include a general appearance, size, weight, texture, odor, and so forth. And the existing batch steamer processes that is being used here in Fiji has been introduced like some 1800 years ago, and there's been some changes, little changes along the way. So my research is to help improve this process to help the locals produce qualitative batch steamer that can be traded for a good price. And also this trade will benefit both parties involved, that is the people at our local communities that practices the harvesting, and they are the first people to sell it off to the middle peasants, which are the buyers, and also to the government and the exporters overseas. So this is importance sea cucumber. This is a reminder that the importance sea cucumbers play in the marine environment and also in the lives of Pacific Islanders. And it calls to us for practice conservation and sustainable management so that they do not become extinct. And the research is provided by the responsible authorities like the fisheries and organizations and institutions will help us take action on how to use this resource wisely, protecting and restoring our sea cucumbers. With that, I think my time is up, so I'll say that batch steamer trading has sustained generations of Pacific Islanders, and every action we make now will contribute in ensuring that future generations will benefit from it as well. So that is what I have with me today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Back at you, Gabi.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. What an insightful presentation. Into the biology and into the roles this organism plays in our environment, in our ocean. So just following up, I just had two questions. What do you think? The current measures, do they limit enough? Are they enough to restock the wild populations? Are they enough? What we are doing, is it enough?
I think from further researches, one I can speak on is the limitation on the size harvest, the 7.6. I think that is not applicable for all species, since sea cucumbers have different species and they all reach maturity at a different size. Yeah? So sometimes people will harvest them and they're still juvenile and they didn't have time to reproduce. So with that, and some of the actions is not enough. I think there should be more activities in ensuring that people follow the rules and laws to harvest these cucumbers. Thank you.
Wow, that is very interesting. That by species, we can review this by species as they have different sizes for maturity. Wow, interesting. And as a public, how do you think we can get involved or contribute to effectively manage these sea cucumbers? Like, say, if I was a member of the public and I'm not doing any work in this area and I would like to contribute, how would I best fit in?
I think as a public, the best we can do is that to follow the law placed by the responsible authorities. If there is a ban on harvesting, then I think we should follow it. And if you manage to come across people who are practicing like IUU fishing, and I think you should like report it to the responsible authorities so people can take action. So this can be recorded as well. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Sabrina. Thank you. Yeah, without further ado, I will now call on and introduce our second panelist for this evening. Our second panelist is Dr. Winifred Reddy Nainoda. Mrs. Nainoda, she has a bachelor's and a graduate certificate from the University of the South Pacific. She also graduated with a master's in honors at the University of Wollongong in Australia and a doctorate in environmental conservation at from Massey University. She is currently the team leader for the Resilience and Sustainable Development team at UNDP. She will be talking about some of the projects and the work that her team has been doing in the region. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Nainoda.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gabriel. Now I'm going to start sharing my screen. Okay. Okay, I think everybody will be able to see my screen now. Thank you, Sabrina, for that research that you're doing. You are the face of the future. You know, the future for environment, conservation, and marine and the ocean world. And also very inspiring to note that you're a young lady. Also the three young ladies that spoke earlier this morning. It's very inspiring to see all these young faces. And I've looked at the list of attendants, so many young people there. So this conservation and this work is in very good hands. So I'll just share it like this with a little, you know, my little cue on the side. And you can see the first picture that is here. I just wanted to show this green picture, first of all, of what is floating out there in the Pacific. This great Pacific garbage patch. It's not the only garbage patch that's floating in our oceans. There's 5 actually floating in the different oceans of the world, and this is the one that is in the Pacific. So that's a real grim horror. And I'll try and talk about protecting and restoring the ocean ecosystem by utilizing hidden ecosystem services. Probably wander in and out of this general area during the talk. Okay, so this is the order of the presentation. Just very briefly show you what is the SDG that we work with. Specifically for us, UNDP strategic plan, some ocean facts, the ecosystem services, what it's all about, the issues, what we offer, and some UNDP projects. So I just put in these italics down here, where we are always saying we are ingesting microplastics every day. There is a study, the only one that I know of, and I might be quite ignorant here, they were measuring microplastics in the Solomon Islands. I will not give you the figure, but this is what it's talking about. A 2019 joint study reveals the extent of humans eating plastic. Every week we eat on average 1 Lego brick. Every year, dinner plate, tiny pieces of plastic, and every decade we eat a lifeboat. Okay, I hope you're all frowning there. That's the third one here is on the SDGs. I'm sure everybody is familiar with these beautiful words, but we have to action it. Conserve, sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. And impacts of climate change, overfishing, marine pollution, etc., that I'm going to discuss later. So for us, for UNDP, we look at outcome 2, output 2.5 under the strategic plan. Next, just some ocean facts. This is not all the ocean facts. When I was reading through some of the articles that were coming out today, I just picked a few of these. The oceans is 70% of the Earth's surface. 94% of living species are in the oceans. 70% of the planet's oxygen is produced by oceans. So far, we have discovered only 240,000, about 250,000 species. And this is believed to be only a fraction of what's really in there in the oceans. And of course, the Pacific Ocean is the world's largest oceans. It contains around 25,000 islands, and it has more islands than anywhere else on the planet. Isles of miles and miles of isles and smiles is one advertisement that I had come across earlier. Next is the ecosystem services. You know, this is so, if an elephant or a dog read this, they'll be so disappointed because it is so man-oriented. Like, I believe that every living being has equal rights. But when we talk about services, it's only for what men can get out of it. So different types of services, whatever ecosystems you're talking about. So it'll be different services for terrestrial or for a catchment, for instance, or forests. For this one here, I've picked out the types of parameters that are involved in the ecosystem services provided by oceans. And the first one, the provisioning services, what products that we can obtain from the ecosystem that provide us services such as energy, the seafood, biomedical, pharmaceutical, that is, the jobs, and of course, economy, fisheries trade, and whatever other trade that we have from the oceans. Regulating services, flood prevention, wetlands, protection from storm surge, and erosion control. Now, when I travel sometimes and I see the mangroves being cut down, And, you know, it's like at the sea, there's mangroves and the rivers go up. So when there's a lot of rain, these mangrove areas actually absorb. It's like a sponge, water. But when you take this away and you start putting in concrete walls and concrete building, you are replacing that place with a sponge. You're replacing it with a brick. So what happens? When it rains, the water backlogs up. And of course, after we do that, then we try and change the direction of the rivers, or we make it deeper, just Band-Aid control that we are doing. So these wetlands, they are actually preventing flood and erosion control. You can see the different types of plants that are on the shore. These are called soft adaptation measures. They are natural, and different plants for the different Pacific islands are used to plant on the seashore to help against erosion, coastal erosion. It's a different species in Tonga, it's different in Fiji, and all the other islands, whether it's in the Pacific or the other parts of the world. The supporting services necessary for the production of all other ecosystem services. Biodiversity, the biological diversity that's out there in the oceans, such as the coral reefs. You know, all these coral reef, why is it a service? Well, it helps with our, as it's saying in the above, in the number 1 green, in our tourism, for example. People come into a country, any countries that has rich biodiversity, from coral reef out into shark feeding, etc. Of course, the oceans is part of the nutrient recycling. A lot of our phosphorus cycles or any other cycles also include in it the oceans, just as the water cycle does include oceans. And of course, primary productivity. This has to do with the food web, that you have a very large base of phytoplankton producing this food that goes all the way up and in the oceans. Right at the top, of course, is the shark. And when we have sharks, we are disturbing the whole ecosystem balance when it has to do with productivity. So inside the oceans, the primary productivity, and you can even see the colors. The different colors are given out depending on the concentration of phytoplanktons, for instance. So cultural services, I can talk on this particular one for 5 years, but I'll just limit myself here. Educational, recreational for everybody, and heritage and cultural services. All these, you know, beliefs and values, the totems we have are based on, you know, like every Fijian has a fish, has a plant, and all these could be the basis of your marine protected areas work, these values that they have over totems. So it's said that if you want to influence somebody's behavior, you work on their values. Because no matter how much I bring in my SDGs and my whatever this one is saying, whatever that one is saying, if it doesn't affect their values, I'm talking especially about the communities. And we are all part of the communities where we originally came from. So if you talk about totems and all these values they have about the oceans, then it's going to be almost like, I'll talk about it later, a recipe for sustainability. And all these cultural values, beliefs, practices, they form a strong social capital. And you can see the humans now, our social capital is getting very weak in some areas. Of course, it's also provide this spiritual and aesthetic health and well-being. So why do we do all these SDGs? Why do we do all this? To the individual, it's our notion of health and well-being. So for us Pacific people, I actually heard one of the young ladies saying this morning, that the ocean is our endowment fund. I don't have an endowment fund. So when I heard this, it made me very happy. But we have to gift it to our descendants. We inherited it from our grandfathers, and they have to be gifted to our descendants. Next, the issues that we have. Remember the Lego on your plate? Well, pollution, Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Plastic is 3 times the size of France. And we find 100,000 plastic-related deaths of marine animals. This is what we see. We do not even know how many deaths of marine animals are happening out there that we cannot see. Pollution, the runoff from land, pesticide, nutrients, sedimentation, all these untreated waste or badly treated waste from our sewage treatment plants, all these effluent, they get discharged into the sea. So you see the long pipes coming from your sewage treatment plant, for instance, all this effluent is discharged out into the oceans. And then you have invasive alien species, boats traveling between countries and ballast water carrying these invasive species. And of course, the industrial effluent not being treated properly, they discharge. And I can name some rivers in Fiji, which have just gone down in quality and everything else because of industries. And of course, climate change and global warming. Acidification, because of carbon dioxide going up, carbonic acid back into the ocean makes the water acidic, causing bleaching, and even for global warming, rising sea levels because of melting ice, and of course, the loss of coasts. And you know very well that, never mind my village, situated on the coast, 70% of the people in the Pacific, even more, live along the coast. Of course, the biodiversity loss, because as you change the habitats parameters such as the temperature and the acidity, these are going to affect flora and fauna. It's just like all of a sudden the earth temperature went to 35. Those who cannot tolerate that will have to be going into the next life. That's the same thing we are doing for this flora and fauna in the oceans. We are changing the temperature they live in and the acidity. And shark killing, I had already talked about that. It's right at the top of the food chain. And once we keep on removing sharks, it's going to affect the whole pyramid. Overfishing, illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing that is going on. Overfishing maybe at the country level, at the community level, but out in the oceans, we have this IUU going on because it's such a vast ocean, it's probably hard to police it. And of course, the marine offshore mining, oil drilling going on, metal extraction, sand extraction, etc. And who is the biggest threat? Now, maybe I should take away oceans here and just say planet. That is man. Because all of the above, you can see all of the above are consequences of anthropogenic or man-made activities. Finally, what do we do at UNDP? UNDP is a development partner for 14 Pacific Island countries. If we can group it, it is into 4 main areas. We give advice. We have access to financial institutions because we are implementing partner. Sorry, that should be implementing agency, IA, for GEF, an accredited entity for GCF. And we also have strong partnerships with bilateral and international donors. So that's accessibility of finance to countries or organizations that need finance. Existing and continually strengthening the partnerships that we have. And that is from community level, country level, regional, and up to international levels. We work hard to continue to have strengthened partnerships with all these levels. The interventions that we have are programs and projects on the ground. Again, it's from community to regional levels in the Pacific in this case. So we talk about the community. I've underlined community there. And I got this from somewhere, I think it was a paper on UN human rights and climate change. While Indigenous people are among the most affected by biodiversity loss and other environmental harm, they are often best suited to protect it through traditional knowledge, customary laws, sustainable use of management resources, collective land ownership, and management practices. Look over here, it says, I believe, for me personally, I believe that sustainability of the project is when communities have ownership over it. And that happens when we marry, we talk about two bodies of language, of knowledge. We talk about the Western or science knowledge, and then we talk about indigenous knowledge. And in so many writings, I see the term used that we must incorporate indigenous knowledge into this standing knowledge already. No, we have to marry them. They have to come in equal. And we draw the best out of both bodies of knowledge. The UNDP offer in the Pacific, our interventions are from regional programs, country projects, and small grants project. These small grants project, the money goes directly to the communities. There are some requirements there. For example, if you're doing some village or community work, it has to have the support in writing of regional bodies, such as provincial councils in Fiji, etc. And these is our areas of work. And you can see some words here that you read about every day. There's EBM, ecosystem-based management, nature-based solutions. Both of these we use in our Reach to Reef projects. Sustainable livelihoods, because while the community is conserving the oceans, they also have to live, eat and live, strengthening the governance from community to cabinet. I wanted to go right down here. TEK recognition and support. You have to recognize that when you go into the community, especially in the Pacific, when there's a lot of traditional communities, you cannot bring in your ideas, no. You have to listen to them, they know their environment, and you have to value and appreciate and give recognition to the traditional ecological knowledge that is there. We also do coastal adaptation work. And of course, this climate security work now that we do for 3 low-lying atoll islands, Tuvalu, Aramai, and Kiribati. And we also do risk-informed governance. This UNDP Rising Up for Seeds, I won't even go here, but this is a global offer by UNDP that we are rising up for seeds. You can Google this and it will have exactly what I've got here in the on the plate. Some examples of the work that we have the Reach to Reef program, which totals about 90 million. It's almost coming to an end now. And we do partnership with UNEP, FAO, and it's being executed by SPC, the regional component, whereas the governments for the various Pacific Island countries execute their own country programs of Reach to Reef. And it talks about water, land, forest, because all these are interrelated, and preserving ecosystem services. The other one that has to do with the open ocean is the PIOFM2. We did stage 1, and this really benefits a lot of the countries in the Pacific, especially those that are relying economically on the tuna and the fisheries industry. This is executed by the FFA, and we work together with the FAO on this one. The Tuvalu Coastal Adaptation Project by GCF, it's on coastal protection, 36 million for 3 islands on Tuvalu, Nanumea, Nanumanga, and of course, Funafuti. And then we have this one, which is really exciting too, the Global Fund for Coral Reefs. I see a lot of you people that are here listening in, you are part of this already, that we are looking at a blue economy, where we work with MPAs on a blended facility. Whereas before we used to just bring in the fund and help and conserving and management of marine protected areas. This time there's a return on investments on marine protected areas. So after all this, I just want to leave you with this message: think globally, and it's for every individual. It's not the responsibility of the government or regional bodies or the UN to conserve our ocean. If it has to be, it has to start with me. And I've just got 3 things here. What you can do as an individual is participate in these cleanups, use less plastic, and please eat fish during the non-spawning season. And you can see some of us are doing that right now with our pictures on Facebook, having this protection for certain species, not to eat them during this spawning season. And with that, thank you very much. Over to you, Gabriel.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Nainova. When you were speaking, hi, Auntie Winnie. Thank you so much, Auntie Winnie. Very insightful as well. As you spoke, there was an Indian proverb that I've heard, and it goes, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors; we borrow it from our children." I think they've used this before, and even the UN has used it. I think back in 2016 or 2018 on a World Environment Day post, I think. But the most intriguing part for me in your presentation was how this phytoplankton, they produce 70% of the oxygen we breathe every day. They're like the lungs of the planet. We've only known the forest and rainforests as those that do this, but actually, it's actually produced more, and in majority by this phytoplankton. Very interesting. So I just have 2 follow-up questions for you. One is one of the categories. One has to do with one of the categories of ecosystem services. These are cultural services. So along the lines of indigeneity, how can indigenous communities get more involved, and what have been the reasons they haven't been engaged effectively in the past, and only recently, from your experience?
I don't have all the answers to that, Gabriel. But I think that project implementation has changed in that those who are implementing the projects now, maybe within the last 10 to 15 years, are really giving priority and the recognition that that the community deserves, because they are the ones that know their ecosystem the best. So I hope it will increase, because otherwise it's just going to be another story where you go in, do your project, when you move out, the project dies. Because you have to recognize them, their values, the community values. You have to recognize the community governance structures, that you marry them together with what you are bringing in. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Auntie Winnie. And thank you for all the great work you do at UNDP and for the work UNDP does in the region. Now I will move on and invite our third and final panelist for the night, Mr. Vince Kerr of Kerr and Associates. He is a marine ecology consultant. So Mr. Kerr has a bachelor's in biological science from the University of Oregon in the United States, a diploma in horticulture and nursery management from the Royal Institute of Horticulture in New Zealand at Lincoln College. And today he will be talking about some of the work he's done over the years in the region as well as in New Zealand. Over to you, Mr. Kerr.
Thank you, Gabriel. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank all the people involved with AIS. It seems like a fantastic program that you're all involved in, and really important. I'm going to talk to you tonight about some projects that I'm doing at the regional and local level, and I have a little slideshow to show you some of the ways that I'm involved with the region that I live in, which is the northern part of New Zealand. We think of this as the warm place, but you people would think about it as the cold place. The warmest day in the middle of summer for us is equivalent to the coldest day in Rarotonga, which gives you some idea. And we never have warm days like Samoa. Anyway, this first slide is a really special place way up in the northern tip of New Zealand. And this project that I'm involved in has nothing to do with any government, has nothing to do with the United Nations. It's all about the local people that live there. This is a remote part of the northern part of New Zealand, and almost the entire community on this peninsula, which I'll show you a map of later, are Maori, as a Maori community that has lived there for probably 800 years through the generations. So it's one of these few places in New Zealand where it's not even really a mixed community, it's a traditional Maori community. And so I got involved in this project when I heard that they were deciding to do something about the depletion of their marine resources. So I sort of met all these people, and what I discovered was that these people really had the answer to what they wanted for their future. They had a very clear vision. They also had worked out that the government was never going to come to town. And that's the sad story about our region and really all around coastal New Zealand, is that we've had tremendous depletion of the local fishery in the shallow waters, coastal resources. And there's volumes and volumes of complicated political issues that are stopping the government from moving on this. And maybe that's not unlike Fiji or Samoa or Cook Islands. Governments are slow. They're oftentimes the worst and the longest to catch on to what's an obvious idea. So these people decided they were going to do this without the government. Lots of people said that you can't do that. And they said, well, yes, we can do that. We've lived here for 800 years. And we have decided that it's time to take action. So they declared a rahui, which in the Maori language means a protection of that area for things to replenish, for the life of the sea to come back. And rahui are used for a number of reasons in traditional cultural ways. But in this particular application of the rahui, there's no fishing allowed and no disturbance of any marine life. And the idea is to bring back the life of this beautiful bay. which is really, really sadly degraded from overfishing over many years. It's always been a very popular place. So I'll weave in and out of this particular story, but we're in the 4th year of this Rahui. And the first question that people asked was, how are you going to enforce the rules of the Rahui? And they thought about this long and hard, and they said, we're going to educate people, and we're going to ask them to support us and ask them to support the vision of what we're trying to do. And of course, lots of people said that wasn't possible, and they said it is possible, and that's what we're going to do. And we're 4 years into this project, and we've had very little trouble with compliance and enforcement. I need to also say that they informed the Crown that they didn't want any help from the Crown, and they didn't want to use any of the laws or regulations. And they wanted to use this under their traditional authority. Okay, could I have the next slide, please? Another project that I'm involved in is the Mountains to Sea Conservation Trust. And this is a sort of another strand of work that I'm involved in that is quite different, but also related. 20 years ago, as it turns out, we've just had our 20-year birthday, 4 people, and I was one of them. There were 2 of my students. I was teaching environmental studies in those days, and another scientist that I was working with. We got together and we decided we were going to do engagement programs. We're going to develop engagement programs with our community that would bring the environmental issues that we were really concerned with to the communities, to the marae, to the people in our region. And so we set about working on this theme. And in each case, the stream work and catchment work we did and the marine work we did was all about getting people to experience the life in these systems. We felt that if children, parents, schools, teachers could simply just engage with what was around us, our environment around us, that could be the catalyst that could start in motion the process of caring for the environment and doing the things we needed to do. Our trust now is very big. There's something like 50 people that work for our trust around the country. We have programs all around the country. We just won a major environmental award, Supreme Award in our region. And the formula's been very successful. Again, there's been no government involvement. All this is done through various funders and a mountain of volunteer inputs into the trust. And if you Google Mountains to Sea Conservation Trust or Experiencing Marine Reserves or Whitebait Connection, you'll get to websites that tell you all about these programs. And like to give you an example, some of the things we do, next slide, please. In the marine area, the main program that we run is called Experiencing Marine Reserves, and we do this project where we have groups of young people and their parents, teachers, and we take them out to snorkel in their local area, and then we take them out to snorkel in a nearby marine reserve, which is fully protected and restoring and full of marine life, and then we ask them to make a comparison between the two. And then when that sort of process runs its course with that experience, we then ask them to think about a project or something that they could do in their community for the ocean. And in these 20 years, there have been some absolutely wonderful projects that have come out of this. And the people themselves are the first students that we had 20 years ago are now, of course, grown up. And some of those people are working as coordinators as a career in our program, which is pretty amazing. So that's a generational involvement in conservation action. And the other thing that I just want to point out is that there is a little miracle that happens when you get kids in the water and interacting with marine life. This is a scene from off our coast where the kids got to swim with an orca, which for anyone really is a special experience. And it's really something to watch the effect it has on these kids. So that's a little bit about the Marine Mountains to Sea Conservation Trust. I'm going to show you now a few slides from various presentations that I do. I find myself, for various reasons, talking to community groups and people and sometimes government groups about marine conservation. And I've had to come up with ways of engaging people and getting people interested in marine conservation. Next slide, please. In our region, there's there's a huge amount of history, like with our Maori communities that are still intact up here in the north, and also with our European history that goes back some 200 years. And I got the idea of telling the story about marine life as a back to future story. In other words, if we can go back to the past and understand what things were like in the ocean before all the commercial fishing started, we can learn about what's natural in the sea, and we can be inspired by that. And then that can help us to form goals about what we want to do in the future. Next slide, please. So I always start out those talks. This is, by the way, a horrible picture of the Central Pacific because it looks like no one lives there, which absolutely is untrue. But anyway, the reason I use this picture is to demonstrate how significant the Pacific Ocean is. When you look at it from this point of view, we're 1/2 of the entire planet. And little old New Zealand sits down at the bottom of this amazing scene. And of course, the Central Pacific is in the middle of it. But that really that's a start of getting people thinking about how important it is with our position in the middle of this incredible ocean. Next slide. So then I start telling the stories that I've managed to dig up from long ago history of our Maori people and how they lived off the resources in our region. And obviously, like all Pacific peoples, the ocean was a prime element in their life, and a lot of their food came from the ocean. And the northern part of New Zealand was hugely productive in terms of the marine life that was there. Next slide, please. This is a traditional fishery of a shark that we call kope, or it's a small shark that lives mainly in our estuaries, but also in the shallow coastal area. And this was a huge fishery for the local people before the Europeans came, and they had very sophisticated management and rituals for the harvest of these sharks. The sharks would only be harvested at a certain time of year, and certain groups of people would be allowed to harvest certain amounts. And then that huge resource that was created with the dried shark meat was then traded amongst the tribes in through a range of complicated arrangements. This species is no longer commercial fished in New Zealand, and it's still present, but in very small numbers. We know nothing really about the recovery of this species because it's virtually depleted to a point where we're not sure it will recover. But that's a project for the future, which shows what can happen when the careful management of the indigenous people is replaced by the catch everything as fast as you can, let's earn a lot of money system of what the Western societies did in the early days of New Zealand. Next slide, please. These are just a few shots of from the turn of the last century, I should say, the sort of abundance. In the early part of the European settlement of New Zealand, fishing was done from rowboats and longboats, and it was typically started to be done by just a few people, and then these fish would be just moved around the community and swapped and so on. But they were just incredible amounts of fish in our estuaries and coastal area. Next slide, please. The northern part of New Zealand is also famous for its shellfish. These are scallops, and this is what occurred on a beach after a big storm. And these are a wonderful resource, and have now been depleted down to very small stocks, and very little commercial fishing goes on. Next slide, please. The shellfish you're looking at there is the toaroa, which is one of the largest beach clams in the world. Again, a very special sort of highly productive system on our West Coast beaches. Has been closed to even recreational fishing for now something like 60 years because it was so depleted. And you can see the top picture of a groper there that used to be caught locally often, and some of our large crayfish the past. Next. This is a picture of harvesting the Toroa during the days when they basically got stuck in and harvested the resource. And they used to use horses and plows to dig up the beach and harvest all the shellfish. Definitely not a traditional way of harvesting. Next. And next. Okay, some of the work I'm involved in is ecological and learning about the problems of the overfishing. And one of the problems we have is our large predators on the reef, the fish you're looking at is a snapper. They're the ones that control the sea urchins, which is just about to eat. And the sea urchins are usually in balance with the kelp forest. However, if you take out the large crayfish and the snapper, the sea urchins multiply and they mow down the kelp, and we have this whole degradation of the kelp forest. The kelp forest is the main productive shallow habitat. Next slide, please. Which in a way is parallel to the coral reefs. And we have a very big problem of decline of our kelp forest due to the overfishing, taking the predators out, upsetting the balance with the kinnibarons and so on. Here's a little cartoon about marine reserves. Hopefully it doesn't look quite that bad on the edge of our marine reserves, but it's actually not a complete lie to say that people are pretty keen to fish on the edges of our marine reserves. Next slide. This is a cartoon, a little drawing by one of our students that shows the difference between areas that are fully protected on our coast and areas that are normally fished. And it's not too much of an exaggeration, actually. The difference is quite stark in terms of the kelp forest and all the fish and species that live there and the natural abundance of these larger fish especially. Next. And this is just another drawing that sort of tells the story between fishing and no fishing. Next. Some of the other work that I'm involved in is all about habitat mapping. And habitat mapping is quite essential to all kinds of things. But really, I think the original reason I got into it was a way of engaging communities with the ocean that was out in front of them. Because as you'll see in a minute, with the sort of habitat mapping that we can do these days, it is really possible for people to understand and see a lot more of the habitats of their coastal area. This particular slide is about the loss of kelp forest. The 1950 photo shows the dense, dark kelp forest completely covering the reefs. The gray areas are sandy areas. And on the right-hand side, you'll see bare gray rock where the kelp forest once was. And this is sort of a graphic sort of illustration. Can you hit your button and we'll have a look at the next two images. That's an example of what are the kelp forests in its natural state. And this is on the right-hand side there is what a kinnibaron looks like when all the kelp forest is removed. It's a rather sad picture, and you can imagine the difference in biodiversity terms between these two conditions. Next slide, please. We're back up in Matai Bay now, and this is an example of the contrasting habitats that we have. One on the left is a kinnibaron where all the kelp forest has been removed, and on the right-hand side is an area where the kelp forest is actually very healthy, and you can kind of see and maybe imagine the productivity that would be associated with these kelp forests. Next. And this is just a quick image of what it looks like a bit deeper down. Our kelp forests in the northern region go down to about 30 meters, and then there isn't enough light for the kelp to thrive. And we have a sort of sponge dominated filter feeding community. We don't have any large stony corals in our waters because it's too cold. However, I'm told that's about to change. The next slide. And this is sort of an example of the urchins ganging up in a little army to mow down the last bits of kelp forest. Next. This slide is an example of the tremendous amount of biodiversity that grows in association with the kelp forest. There's a very, very diverse range of sponge and hydroids, bryozoans, all kinds of invertebrate, encrusting invertebrate species that thrive in this sort of temperate, cooler water under the shelter of the kelp forest, which makes an ideal home for many marine species. Next. This guy his name is Fetu Rutini, and he's one of the leaders of the Hapu group up at Matai Bay. And this picture is from a dive that he and I were doing, counting crayfish in special spots to gauge how the rahui was doing in terms of the recovery of the crayfish. Next. So one of the things I've been doing with the project at the rahui with the up in Matai Bay with the Hapu is trying to come up with monitoring programs that people from the Hapu would get interested in and could learn how to do. This is a simple fish counting apparatus. On the frame on the upper left-hand side, there's a GoPro camera mounted at the top, and this system simply sits on the bottom for 30 minutes and records a video of all the fish that come to the bait container that's attached at the bottom. And then we have a standard monitoring protocol that we can analyze this video and produce numbers of the fish and sizes of the fish in a whole bunch of locations. Next. And this is just a map of the 26 sites that we have in our monitoring, which cover inside and outside the rahui. The orange lines are the borders of the rahui. So we're interested in the differences between the outside and inside where there's no fishing. Next. I'm going to show you just a few shots of a few other things that we're doing with the monitoring. These little squiggly gray lines are what I call a diversity dive, where we go down on scuba and spend a whole tank searching, crisscrossing the reef at different depths and recording all the fish species that we can see in one tank of air. And we do that in the same place every year. And it gives us sort of a fairly good picture of how the diversity of the reef species is changing over time. Next. And this is another monitoring system that we have, and it's called a time swim. And this one's done with a diver on a snorkel, swimming very slowly and simply doing these transects. Each of the transects is about 400 meters long, takes about 15 minutes to swim, and a diver has a little slate and pencil and is trained to identify the fish species that we see in the shallow part of the reef. And the good thing about this method is we can teach people to do it fairly quickly. Anyone who's good in the water and is keen can learn to do it. And we can do it many times a year and get lots of data. This year, we're adapting this particular technique to the traditional Maramataka calendar and knowledge system, which is the stage, the stages of the moons and celestial objects and the influences on nature and our lives. So that's going to be interesting to see how that all works out. But it's actually been quite a successful monitoring technique, and it's really quite simple. Next. And this is just another part of the rahui. Next. Okay, this is now we're looking at the peninsula where these people live. It's called the Kari Kari Peninsula, and you can see the habitat map that was completed this year. I can't get into the details of it. The blue line that you see in the middle is the boundary of the rahui. The reddy sort of areas are rocky reefs. The bluey gray areas are soft sediments. And the sort of pink areas that you can just see at this scale are actually the urchin barrens where the kelp forest has been degraded. Next. This rahui is about 4 kilometers across, depending on which way you measure it. This is a sort of zoomed in look, and there's a list there of all the habitats. There's a lot of work in making this kind of map. I can't go into all the details of how we do it, but it's largely done with a small boat and different types of sonar and dropping cameras and so on, and also aerial photography. and it's all done in a GIS system. But it's a really valuable thing in terms of getting people to engage with things like, well, where should we put the boundaries, and how big should this rahui be, and how should we set up our monitoring? Where do we want to survey? You know, all those kind of practical questions that are important. Next. This is another image of another site, again, about the same size. We're looking at about 4 kilometers of coastline. And it's just a few pictures with the little lines to sort of show you some of our habitats. This is a place called Mimi Whanata, which is on our east coast. And again, the reddy areas are rocky reefs, and the division between red and blue is the 30-meter mark where the kelp forest starts and the invertebrate gardens start. And that the sort of light pink are the urchin bears where we've lost kelp forest. Next. Okay, and then finally, I always end up with a bit of a story about what we've learned from our no-take reserves. Some of them are marine reserves, some of them are rahui. They come in various forms here in New Zealand, but the lessons are pretty much always the same. And basically that they work. We end up with more fish, bigger fish. I say that the 10 to 100 rule applies, and generally we end up with 10 times more fish, but from 100 to 1,000 times more biomass. And that's because in heavily fished place, you see all the big fish gone. And those are the ones that really make a difference ecologically, but also make up the biomass of our reefs. And also that no-take reserves support all forms of local management. I never see it as a conflict with traditional management. I see it as an option or part of traditional management. And in any case, everything that happens in a no-take reserve is supportive of the area and the management that you're doing. And we do need principles to help us with this work, because the ocean is so big. We can never study everything. We can never understand everything that goes on. And the principles are simple. Protect some of every habitat. As the network grows, the benefits increase dramatically. Maximize the advantages of traditional management and local fisheries management working alongside long-term protection. Next. And this is a pretty special shot of an orca off our coast, taken one day when I was out doing one of these habitat maps. And there's a bit of a web address of my partnership website, Current Associates, that you can go to. And you can also, as I say, search Mountain Sea Conservation Trust. So thank you for the opportunity to join in the webinar tonight. And I hope that it was of some interest to you. And I wish you all the best with all the work in the Pacific. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vince. Thank you for sharing the work you've been doing and the work you continue to do. Very encouraging. It was good to see a picture of the orca. I think it was just a couple of months ago we had a sighting of a pod too, off of an island here in Fiji.
Wow.
So yeah, quite interesting. So I just have a follow-up question for you. What would be your thoughts on how we can make fishing sustainable without losing access to the food we rely on or coastal communities rely on?
Yeah, you know, I think that the discussions that I'm having with the group that I work with up in Mai Bay are actually the kind of the answer, because in all of our discussions we end up talking about the restoration that is needed, how restoration works, how can we best do it, and then we're also talking about the balance with the people who live in that bay, the people who live in the other bay, and that's really the issue. We have to do both. We have to get our heads together as a community. We've got to figure it out. And in the end, what we have found with that project is that in the beginning, people saw it as a loss when we started talking about no fishing areas. But then that changed with the rahui as people started to think about, well, this is about restoring what we once had and about the future. So it's going to always be a balance within a community, I think, where the answers lie. And sometimes it's hard, but we need to do it.
Yeah, we gotta make the tough calls. We can also gauge from your presentation how important assessments and carrying out reviews and assessments on understanding the flora and fauna of an area or an ecosystem. That way you can provide a better picture or the contrast like you've shown us on kelps. So would you say that some of the most successful conservation tactics stem from you could say the old ways of the people of the land or from the communities, if we had to practice this?
What I would say is that I learn things from the traditional history there is no way to learn those things with the science methods that I have available to me. Like I can go to some of the old people and I can learn about I can learn about the stories they were told when they're growing up. But those stories are connected to many generations. And there's no scientist on this planet that can look into that book. You know, that's the huge value of traditional knowledge. And that's becoming really important in our science here is what we get from doing that, which is simply just listening and learning. So there's that. But there's also how things work in communities, and there's a whole bunch of issues there where we can benefit from tapping into our communities. And we are, where we're doing it, it's really successful.
Yeah. And I guess we just have to continue, right? Thank you so much, Vince. I will invite the other panelists to join us back here on screen, where we will be taking questions from our audience. And thank you so much for the great enthusiasm from our participants with your sending in your questions. We'll just go over a couple of the questions submitted. Thank you. Welcome back, Sabrina and Winnie. Thank you so much for the presentations on the work you've shared with us today. Very interesting and insightful. Thank you so much. So our first question will go to Sabrina. If you're ready. Our first question is from Miriam. So the question is around coastal communities. It is, can coastal communities, especially those that are affected by the pandemic, benefit from the sea cucumbers even if there is a ban? Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Can they benefit from the sea cucumber even if there is a ban? I don't think so, since the ban is on, you cannot harvest the sea cucumber to sell it. And from what I understand is that to benefit from sea cucumber, you have to harvest it and then sell it off. You have to process it and sell it, unless they've been harvesting and selling the fresh sea cucumber without processing it, then I think they will get benefit from that as well. Because right now the ban on the harvest is still on.
I think thank you for that, Sabrina. I think a second part to her question was, is it true that the current ban on sea cucumbers in Fiji have been lifted, because she might have read in the papers that this has been the case to satisfy the community's use and needs?
Yes, they have been going around the topic, because I'm also waiting for the Ministry of Fisheries to lift the ban so I can carry out my research. But they released a statement earlier that they will be extending the ban. So right now, the ban hasn't been lifted yet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have a question for Auntie Winnie. She mentioned she spoke on microplastics. This question is on how much microplastic are we consuming, and what are some of the pathways these microplastics get into our bodies?
Thank you. Thank you very much. You just have to Google it. The first time I read it, it's coming out of the taps. Please don't tell what tell water and sewerage people in Fiji that they are not treating the water well coming out of our taps, but that is what it is. And sometimes we consume it when we eat fish, because fish, they take these microplastics into their bodies. And of course, I read somewhere that it's already coming out of our taps. We're already ingesting it and drinking it.
Thank you.
Google it and you will see it's not coming from Winnie. Please don't go on somewhere and say Winnie says. No, it's right there. The evidence is there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Winnie. I hope that was a question from Mulukale Sitamata. You have a second question from Ronil. You mentioned that the Western knowledge and traditional knowledge needs to marry, and we have to select the best from both that works for the situation at hand. Although there is somewhat of a gap present between the two, what means can be used to ensure that these two merge successfully?
It's very complicated. Any marriage is complicated because you're bringing in two individuals and you do not want either of them to lose their identity. Yes? So just like in a marriage, you have to take the best of both individuals. Sometimes the sum of those will merge properly and you move together forward. And sometimes, you just have to pick the best strategy of either one and move forward or do some modification.
Thank you. And one question on regarding cultural services. How has this impacted cultural and traditional knowledge on the psychology of young people, Kiribati, Tuvalu, Marshall Islands, if they are to inherit this knowledge?
I think it was saying that if they lose their land, then how does it affect them psychologically? And I don't have the mandate to talk about how these people will feel. That is a good topic of research for those of our friends who are here from those countries and even from communities that have lost their lands to the encroachment from the sea. But one thing that I had read somewhere is that the culture and the knowledge moves with the people. And you can even see it in the evidences now where overseas and even in Fiji, where language revival, cultural practices are coming back. And we have to go into there for any cultures of the world to practice it, to value it, and to appreciate, and most of all, to be proud of it. So that wherever you go, whether you stay on or, you don't have to wait for climate change. I want to migrate to New Zealand. Yes, Vince. So, I take the culture with me. And I hope that is sufficient. Stop smiling, Gabriel.
So the next question is to Vince. So Vince, this question is from Tanya. Her question is, what are your thoughts on the replenishment of our oceans and its resources regarding the rich marine life that we had decades ago? Can we restore this habitat if we are to achieve the SDGs in the next decade? Is that possible, feasible?
Yeah, I think the first answer is that it's our responsibility to do everything we can to try. There is a lot of encouraging results from conservation work done around the planet. The ocean typically has unbelievable resources for restoration. I mean, if you think about the sort of productivity there would have been of tuna schools in the Pacific, 200, 300 years ago, it's almost an unbelievable amount of productivity that rises from the ocean, or the whales that used to roam the Pacific. I mean, there is this opportunity for restoration. I don't think that's really in doubt as much as whether we can, as communities and countries, sort of get our act together to get on with it. And also my experience is that once people engage with it properly, they become positive about it and they become passionate about it. So it's kind of a job to be done, to engage people in these things. And I think we can do it.
Wonderful. It's always good to be optimistic, right, Antuini? Right, thank you. Vince, there's a second question here for you. It's from Nick. Welcome, Nick. What kinds of satellite imagery are you using with your mapping, and where are you sourcing imagery from?
Yeah, I don't actually use too much satellite imagery, although that's becoming more and more common with projects like mine all over the world, actually. And there's a huge jump in quality and quantity of satellite imagery and different kinds of computer systems and strategies for using it. But I haven't really used that. I have used aerial imagery that I've taken myself and with my partner out of a small plane. And now drone imagery is becoming really the most practical way to do sort of local scale, small scale mapping. Just so versatile and cheap and relatively easy to get underway with it. So that's kind of taking over. But having said that, there's a place for other forms of aerial imagery. I think I'd sort of summarize by saying that we just simply look for the very best imagery we can get our hands on, and any way we can get it, we'll go after it, because it's incredibly valuable for doing this sort of work.
Thank you, Vince.
Mm-hmm.
And the second part would be, what are the main threats to the kelp forests? Are there any projects working on replanting or regenerating these forests? Or how can this be done?
Yes, there is. First off, in our region, the no fishing areas are the closest we can get to natural regeneration of the kelp forest. What happens is the big predators, snapper and crayfish, start to settle in the marine reserve, and they control the kinna, and then the kelp can recover. There's also research going on both here in California, British Columbia, Europe, a number of places around the world with managing the sea urchins with divers to get them down to a low enough level so that the kelp forest can come back. The problem that has some potential, and there's lots of interest in it, but we can't possibly do it on a coastline that's 1,000 kilometers long. It's not possible. So it's the sort of thing that could be used to kickstart a restoration project, but really the control of the overfishing and coming back with the balance between the sea urchins and the kelp, the predators, is what we have to do, and it works.
Do you think with the GIS system you're currently using, does sonar play a part? And could you go into a little detail on this, on how you use sonar for this?
Yeah.
Monitoring.
In lots of different ways. The sonar that I use, I have a $3,000 sonar sounder on my little research boat, and I can do side scan sonar with that in shallow waters, which can be really helpful. But a lot of times I just use straight single beam sonar, which is the sort of common sonar that people would have on fishing boats. And I use a whole series of kind of methods to analyze that simple sonar, but that helps me to determine hard structures and soft structures and so on. And oftentimes that's tested with dropping simple video cameras. And then the more sophisticated stuff comes from the expensive survey gear, the multi-beam sonar that sort of the government or the universities have access to. And that's more for the deeper water and larger areas. And I've also used a lot of that in mapping as well, which is all great if you have $500,000 or several $1 million to do a survey. Which I don't.
Like many great projects in the Pacific, funding funding is very critical and a factor to this.
Yeah, that's all right.
Thank you.
And you can do a lot with very simple gear. Definitely.
Thank you for that. Sabrina, we have not forgotten about you. We have a question for you from Hashna Charan, tuning in all the way from Tohoku University. Welcome. She has a question on your presentation. How does the increase in seawater temperature affect the physiology, taste, or texture of sea cucumber?
Thank you for the wonderful question. As I mentioned, I just started my research. I'll be starting it this year. I'm still waiting to do the field work, but from the past literature review is that increase in sea temperature, especially for the sunfish, it doesn't affect it, like it doesn't kill the sea cucumber, but it improves the growth if the sea temperature is from 28 to 30 degrees. However, for the physiology, the taste and all that, I haven't done readings or research on that yet, but that will be the base of my research. I will be doing sample collection from fresh sea cucumber, cooked and dry, and I will test them for the texture and the nutrient level. And during that time, that is when I will know if it has a impact, if it affects the tissue and the other parts of the sea cucumber. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. Another question from Timothy. What are some other traditional ways we can sustainably use our sea cucumbers?
Traditional ways?
Yeah.
To use sea cucumbers. Some of the ways we can use them is I believe that some part of the coastal communities they use sea cucumber as food. They can eat it. So that is some of the ways, and maybe others have some medicinal. It has some medicinal values and ways in which they can harvest that and use it for medicine purposes. I'm sorry I couldn't provide more information on that part.
No, you answered the question well. Those were some of the ways that we use sustainably here in the Pacific. So I'll invite you to maybe give your final remarks on or share a little bit more to round off our session for tonight.
Okay. Thank you so much to everyone viewing in, listening to this panel for discussion, and also to the AIS forum, as I mentioned earlier, for creating this platform where we can come and discuss and give ideas on how we can contribute in managing our oceans, and also to create a sustainable ocean in which future generations can also benefit from it. Thank you.
Vincent,
is there anything else?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sabrina.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone involved in the webinar. It's been great to be here. I've learned a little bit about some of the things that are going on in the various programs. I think I'll take a message back to the people I work with in my region that this is all happening in Pacific. And it would be great to have more of our Indigenous groups here in the northern part of New Zealand sort of have the chance to share and be involved in the Pacific community, such as yourselves. So I will volunteer to do that little job and see if some connections can be made. Thank you.
Yeah, just thank you very much, everyone, for your time and so much passion coming through your questions, and all the very best for the conservation and management of our oceans and fisheries, and the marriage, of course, between Indigenous and Western science-based knowledge. Thank you, everyone. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Vince, Sabrina, Winnie. Thank you for the work you do. And thank you so much to our participants joining in. As we've all heard today, the importance of being better stewards, and with a little bit more research and better understanding, we can do more for our environment. Thank you so much. Yeah, I guess we'll wrap up for tonight. You have a lovely week. Thank you.